thank you everyone for coming today. Some of the people have already been here, but some of you are new. We're here at our space. This is a co-working space, and what is special about it right now is that we're doing a nomad takeover. That means that Ash and myself are basically running the space for a month. This is our last week. This happened because we were doing the Lisbon Digital Nomads meetups, and we've been organizing lots of events for people to connect in a casual way at meetups or at co-working days, and that's kind of by a coincidence that this happened. We usually don't run co-working spaces. But it's from the community that these kind of talks that we're going to listen to today kind of emerge. So Branko, I think we met 2 years ago in Chiang Mai, where he was freelancing at that moment and still is. Right now he's relaunching a very known kids series from Australia, and he's going to tell us a bit about how we can quote better, since for a lot of freelancers, including myself, that's a great challenge sometimes. So give Branko a hand. And
Hey guys, how you doing? Thank you for coming out today. Everyone can hear me fine?
Yeah. Yes.
Awesome. So welcome to, this is the first time I'm actually presenting this, so bear with me. I'm going to talk about how to quote what you are actually worth. Come in. How you going, guys? So the way I like to refer to it is how to stop running a charity and start running a business. So a little bit about me. My name is Branko. I'm from Perth, Western Australia. I've been travelling since April in 2015. I've been a freelance marketing consultant since December 2015, and I've been teaching freelancers how to quote properly. So just start out with how many people here are actually interested in freelancing but aren't freelancing yet? Cool. And how many people are currently freelancers or running their own freelance agency? Okay, great. Okay, and how many of you feel right now that you're underquoting? Okay, good, this is the talk for you. So what do you think, I'm just going to pick your brains a little bit, what do you think is the biggest reason, say for example, you underquote, do you think?
Because I'm not sure what I would be worth.
Okay, alright. Anyone else?
I just started.
Just started?
Yeah.
So just
the markets, people can underbid you.
okay. You're talking about using like platforms like Upwork and that sort of thing?
Yeah.
Yep, cool. Anyone else?
Because the people like freelance for are known, like our friends or something, so sometimes like, hey, can do this
Sure.
for me.
Gotcha. Cool. All right. Well, perfect. Because here's some of the problems that I've come across, and some of my clients have also experienced. So, getting to the end of a project and wondering why you made no money. So, I don't know if that resonates with you over here. Keep having unforeseen costs eating to your profit. Find it takes you hours to quote for a job, and when you're done, you still lose money. Keep giving clients a price based on what you think you should be getting, rather than what the market will actually pay. So that's like picking a number out of the air and just saying, yep, I'll do it for that much. Have no idea where to start, and struggling with things like self-doubt or not believing you're worth the money. So imposter syndrome, for example. All right, so a long time ago, back when I had my corporate job, I was working for one of the biggest retailers in Australia, and I worked 10-hour days, so I had an 8 to 6 rather than a 9 to 5. My average work week was anywhere between 60 and 70 hours a week. I only got paid for 40 hours of that, which was always fun, so it's a salary for you. I roughly slept 3 hours a night on average. I used to drink the equivalent of 16 cups of coffee a day. And on the weekends, I used to drown my sorrows and party too hard and waste too much money. So I was feeling a little trapped. And that is actually my desk for my old job. My work colleagues had a good sense of humour. So I figured something needed to change, and so what do? when you want to change your career, you go back to school. And you've got to spend 3 years finishing your bachelor's degree, and get that fancy piece of paper to put on the wall and make mum proud. Mum was really proud. But it didn't really get me anywhere. So what has this got to do with freelancing? Basically, my last year of study, I realised I didn't actually want to work for anyone, not in the traditional sense. And I started looking for other options. So I started Googling online. I was like, how do you make money online? And in amongst all the scammy stuff that you see on the internet, I stumbled on a few blogs. And some of them mentioned this place called Chiang Mai in Thailand. Some of you may know it. So basically, I sold my stuff. And just when I got my graduation, a few weeks after that, I flew out to Chiang Mai, Thailand. And for almost a year, I did everything except make money. So I learned to dance salsa, did my first international dance performance in Chiang Mai. I joined in on a songkran, so anyone who doesn't know what that is, that's Thai New Year, where everyone just parties and throws buckets of water on each other. But it washes away all the bad vibes, so it's pretty cool. I did rock climbing in Krabi, just on the beach there, which was pretty awesome, amongst other things. And I blew about 20k in savings in that time. So towards the end of that year, I was on my last $2,000 in the bank, and I decided to take a little break. I went back home, and my friends and family were telling me, like, Branko, come on, you've had a great holiday. It's time to get serious. Or just get a job. You haven't failed. Come back in 3 to 6 months. But I was pretty stubborn, and I refused to give up. And so I went back to Chiang Mai, ended up meeting this amazing girl who really had her shit together. And she suggested to me one night over a glass of Montclair, which any of you who know Montclair is a terrible, terrible wine. It is very bad. She just said to me, why don't you write content? You're smart, you can handle it. And so with that, freelancing. So I started freelance writing in December 2015, and I was charging too little. I was underestimating the time required to do the work. It's taking forever to write proposals. I was very inconsistent in my delivery, and I was just too slow. So basically, I felt like I was giving away my time for free and helping other people benefit their business, but I wasn't really getting much out of it. So I felt like I was running a charity and not a business. And as it turned out, talking to my fellow freelancers in some of the co-working spaces there, I wasn't alone. So I'm just going to throw this back out to you guys. Why do you guys want to be freelancers? Like, what's some of the reasons, the underlying reasons why we want to? Anyone?
Freedom.
Yeah?
Bosses suck.
Yes, that's what
Autonomy. Money.
Sorry? Autonomy, yeah.
Empowerment.
Absolutely. Money.
Flexibility to move wherever you want.
Yeah.
Because you're in your own show.
Exactly. So these were my top ones. So you guys pretty much know most of them. So I realised I was freelancing, but I wasn't actually getting any of these things. Maybe one or two out of the whole list. So I was trying to work out how I could get these things every time and without fail. So I realised two things needed to change. First, I needed to develop a system to follow every time so I didn't make the same mistakes again. And second, I had to change my mindset about freelancing and how I provided value to my clients. Don't stress about notes, guys, because I'll give you guys access to the slides after. So first of all, developing systems. It's pretty embarrassing to admit you aren't sure what you're doing, especially when you're charging people good money for it. And if you can't get a proposal together that doesn't look professional, it reeks of inexperience. And so people can pick up on that. So we need to make sure we can make sure we provide a really professional sort of feel and vibe from it. So how do you do that? You implement a system so you don't miss anything. A lot of the time you find you're doing repetitive tasks and you need to make sure you're not missing them each time you do a proposal. So this is the system I developed. So first, I templated my proposals and scope documents so I can provide fast, consistent, detailed proposals every time. And then I used a spreadsheet, because I hate doing math, to do all the math for me, so I was basing my numbers on facts rather than emotion. And so here's the 8 steps that I use to make sure I nail my quotes every time. First, base project cost. So base project cost is essentially any of the costs directly related to the delivery of the project. So put in short, it is what's going to cost you to get the job done for the client. And so there's 3 common problems that you have when you're calculating the base cost. Come in, young. So first and foremost, freelancers forget to quote accurately for the hours spent on tasks. Now, this is going to be something that someone who's inexperienced in freelancing or inexperienced doing a particular job might struggle with, and it's going to take some trial and error to get right. But for example, if you're a marketing professional or a writer and you've been working for someone else and you want to freelance as a result of that, you should roughly know what you're going to be, like what a task should take. So it's really important to nail that first. Secondly, freelancers forget to charge for the tools and services they use to get the job done. So for example, if you're a designer, you probably use tools like Sketch or the Adobe suite of tools, which cost you around about $50 a month. You maybe have a subscription to like a stock photography site, so you can use that in your designs. So they're all cool costs that you need to take into account. And the most important thing, freelancers forget to charge for their own hours. So let's use web development as an example. Now, I'm not a web developer, so please don't shoot me if I got this wrong. But a web developer, say you're managing the actual project, and you're not actually doing the coding yourself. So you're paying a guy to do the code, paying someone to do the designing, but then you've got other costs too. You've got hosting, domain registration, WordPress theme. But the key one here is your personal hours you spend on the project. So when you're thinking about your personal hours and time spent, think about how much time do you spend managing contractors. So if you're talking to the developers and the designers, like how much time would you be spending managing that? Think about how much time you're going to spend on the phone talking to your clients, whether it's emails or phone calls coming in. Think about the administration behind everything. How many hours you're going to put into making sure you do all the paperwork that you need to do. And also consider how much time you're going to spend reviewing work. Obviously, you're going to do some sort of quality assurance. People are working for you, you're going to take that work and you want to check it out and make sure it's right. And so you might be asking them, well, why am I doing this? You know, it's just my time. You know, I'm paying them, I'm charging them a set price. Like, I've got all the time in the world. The reality is this: if you're running any kind of freelance work, whether you're doing it by yourself or you're running some sort of agency setup, eventually you may want to step back and remove yourself from the equation. So what you need to do is you need to drill into yourself in the beginning that your time is worth money. And so if you're replacing yourself, that has a cost. Otherwise, what you're going to do is you're going to one day decide, oh, I'm going to hire someone to manage my projects, and then realize that it costs a lot more and you're going to have to charge a lot more to make up for it. So the next step we've got to go into is your contingency. So basically, hope for the best, plan for the worst. So essentially, a contingency just helps you think about and be able to manage any unforeseen circumstances that can come up and arise during a project. And it's typically, I would budget between 20 and 30% of your base cost. So imagine your project's €1,000, then another 200 or 300 euros on top you need to add to the base cost. So you might be wondering, well, why do we do this? I mean, how is it fair that I can charge a client money if I make a mistake or something happens? But the reality is that contingency budgeting has been part of project management for the last 20, 30, 40 years. So it's a very common practice. Any project manager will tell you that you need to take into account contingency because no project's perfect and there's always room for error. I also call it pain in the butt tax because sometimes you might get a client who takes a little bit more hand-holding or babysitting, or they just really like to talk to you on the phone. And so that all takes time. So if you don't factor that into your costs, that can be a bit of a pain. And ultimately, at the end of the day, if you don't use up all your contingency, you can actually use it as an incentive to get paid sooner. So for example, if you're wrapping up a project and you're at the end of it, you've got to get like the final payment to close off the deal. What you can do is offer them, say, a 10% discount if they pay the invoice early rather than paying it on the actual due date. So this is a big one, and this is a lot of time people get this number really wrong. You got to think about profit margin is the actual money you're making. So I would argue that there's a minimum of 20% you have to make on every single job you do. Some people argue that 10% is okay. 10% is fine if you're doing volume stuff, but that's right. I mean, but the reality is you're running a service business, you're doing work, right? And there's plenty of other ways to make 10% without having to do a lot of work. A lot of passive investments and stuff will actually give you a 10% return. So if you can actually physically be doing something and involving yourself and talking to people and doing all this work, you need to be making more than 10%. So I would argue a bare minimum is 20%, and even more. If you can charge 50% or 100% margin, why not? But naturally, as you go over time, you can increase it. Just make sure you're actually providing value to your customers for that price point. So for example, if you're starting out in freelancing, it's your first time ever writing a blog post, you can't expect to make $150, $200 for a blog post when you've never written one before in your life. So realistically, you might think you start off at $20 for a blog post. But then as your experience increases, then naturally you can increase your rates. Okay, overhead. So overhead's based on the day-to-day costs of running the business. So these are not related to direct costs for the project. So think about anything like direct labor, materials, or expenses that are directly related to the specific project you're billing a client for. That's not your overhead. It's everything else. So rent you're paying, whether it's on a co-working space that you're using, portion of your rent for, if you're working from home, portion of the rent in your house, utilities, insurances, advertising, and if you have a staff base, any monthly wages you may be paying as well. So that has to be incorporated into it. And obviously equipment, so if you've got a laptop, for example, and you want to be providing, our laptops are our world, right? Essentially, that's where we work. And so you want to make sure you can have the latest gear all the time and you stay up to date. You need to then factor in that cost. So maybe every 4 years, you want to replace your laptop, work out what it costs, divide it over 4 years, and then use that yearly rate to work out add that to your overhead cost to work out what that's worth. Overhead can be anywhere up to 20% of your total revenue. So now I would argue that with most freelancers, if you're a one-man show, you are more than likely going to be closer to 10%. You shouldn't be running at such a high overhead. The only reason you'd be running at that high overhead is if you're managing a team of people and you're like wage costs and that sort of thing, or if you're actually in an office somewhere and operating at like a bricks and mortar sort of arrangement. So, but it varies from industry to industry. So you just kind of need to work out what the norm is for you. But ultimately, I would stick closer to 10%. I operate at under 10, so and quite comfortably. And I work out of a co-working space where I pay every month for a fixed desk. So next, taxes, everyone's favourite subject. So there's three main types of tax you need to be aware of. First of all is your VAT, GST, or sales tax, which they're basically a value-added tax, which governments or institutions require that you charge on top of your services. So depending on where you're operating, you may be required to collect these taxes. So you need to be aware of those and how they affect your pricing. The next one is company tax, or if you're self-employed, some countries also have a self-employment tax. So you need to be aware of what that's costing you and have to factor that into your costs. And then finally, you have personal income tax. And personal income tax obviously is what we pay on the money we take and put in our pockets. So you need to be aware of how much that's costing you too. So naturally, this is all going to vary depending on where you reside and whether or not you're incorporated and where your incorporation is based. So one thing really important here to remember is that when you work for an employer, they pay the taxes on your behalf. So they take your wage, they take a portion of that off, and they put that into an account, and they pay that to the tax department, and you get the difference. And they also probably pay something like your 401k, your retirement fund, superannuation, whatever it may be in your country. So when you're working for yourself, no one's doing that for you. So you need to think about separating that money out ahead of time and putting that aside to make sure you can pay it later. So me personally, I use a bucket system. I have several accounts set up for my business. And I have one set up for taxes, one for my profit, and then one for me. And so that's how I can separate it. If you like to look into that in a bit more detail, there is actually a really popular method called the Profit First by Mijatovic. It's a little bit more complex than my 3-bucket system. I think he has 6 buckets, but he has good reasons for why he does that. So you can Google that and find it. I think he actually has a free ebook, I think, which you can just download and read. So next, payment and transfer fees. So fees, unfortunately, are necessary evil. If we're doing any kind of freelancing and we're taking payments digitally online, we need to be aware of what it's going to cost us every time someone pays us. So there's a few ways of handling that to make sure it doesn't skew your figures really crazy. So one way is you can agree on a payment method before finalising the quote. So if you know that the client prefers to pay via wire transfers and you know that wire transfers are going to cost you X plus a percentage or something, you can incorporate that into your costs before you give them the quote. Another option is to do a quote plus fees, which is actually pretty common, but a lot of people don't like it, especially if they're paying for a premium service. Some people have the mindset that as a business owner, you should be paying any fees to do your business and taking money. So sometimes that doesn't work as well, but that's the simplest method to use. And finally, and this is the one I incorporate most, is I actually limit payment options. So I only give people the option to pay me either via wire transfer or via Stripe. I don't personally like PayPal, but some people need to use PayPal because that may be the only option for you. And that's just because the fees are lower and I know I can manage that better. But in this instance, you would limit payment options, tell them what kind of options are available, and then work out whichever one's the most expensive and incorporate it into your cost. So regardless which method they choose, you're not going to lose money on it. So a couple other things just to be aware of. You need to take into account what jurisdictions you're working into. So if you have predominantly US clients, for example, you might not have any option but to accept American Express payments. Even though American Express payments are known to not be as merchant friendly. And what I mean by that is when like a payer like Amex is not as merchant friendly, they have additional costs involved with things like chargebacks and refunds. So, and they usually side on the side of the consumer more than, say, for example, like the way they handle complaints is always opted in favour of the client. There's not much of a way to move for you to actually handle the situation. So, but if you were to say no to Amex payments, you might exclude a lot of potential business. So you need to take that into account. All right, so this is one of the worst things to deal with, currency conversions, but yet it's something that we tend to deal with out of necessity. And it can also get quite complex. So I'm going to try and keep this really simple as possible. If you are working in a certain currency, for example, I'm assuming you're going to pay most of your bills in one currency. So I pay most of my stuff in US dollars. So I quote clients in US dollars, regardless of whether they're in Europe, regardless of whether they're in Australia, regardless of wherever. My prices are set at USD, simply because I don't want to deal with doing conversions. It's a real headache. However, some people may insist to pay in their own currency, obviously because that's in their favour. So there's a few things you can do. If they insist on paying in their own currency, you can insist on full payment up front. That way you're not going to risk a currency, the loss on the change in currencies. The other option is to actually bump your prices. So you could just increase your prices, say 10% to try and cover any sort of currency risk. And if you're working on projects, which is probably the one where you're going to have the most risk, you have to have very clearly outlined milestones and payment terms to make sure you get paid on time. Because the biggest issue you're going to have there, and this is an issue that one of my clients had with one of their customers, was they quoted a job in Australian dollars, even though they were paying their team and paying all their costs in USD. The project was only supposed to go for 2 months. What happened though was the project dragged out to 9 months, and in that 9-month span, the Australian dollar collapsed against the US dollar. So it went from 1 to 1 to like 80% of the US dollar, and ended up losing money on the job. So you don't want that to happen, so you need to take that into account. And finally, payment terms. So you need to make sure you set clear payment terms in your scope documents from the beginning. So, for example, in my scope documents that I use, I have an appendix towards the back to clearly lay out penalty rates, rush rates, and all those things. So that when you send a proposal to the client, there is no confusion as to the fact that something's going to cost more if they take too long to do something. So for me, for example, because I write, and they might need revisions on a job. So I limit the number of revisions to, say, 3. And then in my appendix, they can have more revisions if they like, but then the rates go up considerably. So the fourth revision starts at 150% of the base cost, then it goes up to 200%, then 250%, 300%. And the reason for that is because it's about making sure your time is valued. A lot of clients are super busy, and they'll look at something and just say, yeah, that's great. And then they realize later that they missed something because they were in a rush and didn't actually do it properly. And so then they ask you to do another revision, which actually creates more work for you and potentially costs you more as well. So when asking for payments as well, it's perfectly okay to ask for payment in full upfront. So for example, if you're doing a month-long, it's a job over a period of a month, you can quite easily get away with getting paid upfront for the whole job. However, that's not as feasible if you're doing, say, a job over a 6-month period. So in that case, you'll either have a milestone payment or you'll have a 50-50. So, and 50-50 is good for people that don't feel quite comfortable giving you the full amount up front, but that's perfectly fine too. So with milestone-based projects, the key thing there is you need to make sure that the payments you take are before you commence. So you do not start doing any work until you get that first check. The reason being is if you start working on a job and don't get paid immediately, you're actually putting your client in a position of power over what you are doing. So essentially what's going to happen is you start working and they haven't paid you yet, and then they decide, for example, after you spend a month working on a project, you know what, I don't think I should pay you that much. I'm going to pay you half of what we agreed to. And what are you going to do? You have no power. You've just done the work. You want to get paid. You've got to feed yourself. So you're better off making sure you're paid at the beginning of a milestone, and then you move on and get paid ahead for the next thing. And that way what happens is if they, for some reason, stop paying, say for example, the business goes insolvent and they can't pay anymore, what happens is they stop paying, you stop working, and you haven't lost anything out of it. So it's just something to consider. Outline any refund policies also in those terms, and keep your word. So if you give someone a guarantee that you're going to provide them X results, stick to it. If you can't provide the results, honour the agreement. And so then come down to it, but what if they don't want to pay anything up front at all? Trust is a two-way street. And if they don't trust you, don't work with them. It's really that simple. So you don't have to work with anyone who's not going to trust you. This is one of the main benefits of being a freelancer, is you get to choose who you work with. So you are not obligated to work with someone. So this leads to the next section, which is your mindset shift. So following system is simple once you have it, but now changing how you think about freelancing is the harder part. I love this code. First of all, lose the employee mindset. Okay, you're an independent business or a contractor, and you're paid for your expertise to do a job. So don't think like you're working with someone, not for them. Think of it that way. Don't listen to people who don't know what they're talking about. So don't go talking to your mum about how you should charge your rates. Don't go talk to the postman about it. Talk to other people in the industry. So that means if you need to, join, there's Facebook groups for every industry out there. You can learn a lot from them. There's a lot of groups out there that talk specifically about pricing for your particular industry. So you got to do a bit of research, you got to do a bit of reading, but you have to then get advice from people that know what they're talking about. Don't just assume because Joe Blow next to you said do this, that it's going to be right. Okay? And stop thinking you're not good enough. So the biggest thing there is imposter syndrome. I mean, how many people here feel like sometimes they go to quote something like, I don't think they're going to pay that. Yeah? So you gotta stop thinking that you're not good enough and you don't deserve it. You're a professional and you deserve to get paid what you earn. And that's the beauty of using a repeatable system, is it will give you that confidence as well. So remember, experts are people that are more than the person asking the question. That's my definition of an expert. All right, so if you check the dictionary online, it's not going to be.
Urban Dictionary.
Yeah, Urban Dictionary, that's right. And I actually originally got this from one of my university lecturers, funny enough, who said that the definition of an expert witness is someone who knows more about that thing than the judge. So that's essentially what I broke it down to. So as far as your client's concerned, if they're paying you for the service, you are the expert owner. And this then goes on to the next bit, which is client selection. So when you're selecting to work with people, you've got to think about what benefit it is to you. Okay, so I have a tale of two clients. When I first started freelancing, my very first client actually was paying me per article $75 for 2 articles a week. For each article. So it's $150 per week for 2 articles of 500 words. And so when I first got that client, I was like, wow, this is really good. This is a great rate. And I was like, oh, I need to expand that. I need to get more clients. So let's start trying to find some other people that I can work for. Which then led me to this next client, which was only paying me $15 an article. But it was an easy job. It was a rewrite. So they had 1 article, and they needed it spun. And so for anyone who doesn't know what spinning content means, it basically means you get the article and you rewrite it 5 times in 5 different ways, basically saying the same thing. What no one told me though was that spinning an article takes just as long as writing one from scratch. So I was getting paid a quarter of what I was getting paid for this other person, essentially, but doing just the same amount of work. So that's what you have to consider when you're working with clients. So before you actually give people your quote, you've got to remember, interview your client. It's an exploratory phase. The whole point of having an interview with a client is that you can speak to them, you can hear them, you can ask them questions, you can work out where their head's at, what are they thinking about, how do they interact with you. And in this case, it's also perfectly fine to ask them what their budget is, because you need to know if they are a good fit. If you ask them what their budget is and you don't work for less than $5,000, and they turn around and say, "Oh, I've got $500 to spend," you don't need to waste any more time. You're wasting each other's time trying to entertain or upsell them or whatever. So it's perfectly okay to ask them for their budget. Secondly, don't give them a quote on the spot. Sometimes you may feel pressured when you're on a call that they say, "Oh, so how much is it going to cost me?" And you might feel that pressure. It's just like, "Oh, $600, you know, right?" So don't feel that pressure to quote them on the spot. Now, if you're experienced and you've been doing it for a while, it's okay to give them a ballpark. But when you give them a ballpark, like, make it a fairly broad range. And I would typically make my ballparks a little bit higher than what I know I would generally quote, because it just makes them feel better when I come back to them and give them a reasonable quote. So, okay, and so you're going to go away, you're going to work the system, you're not giving them a quote on the spot. During the interview, though, don't talk too much. All right, so I've made this mistake where I had a client who actually reached out to me. They found me on LinkedIn and said, "Oh, you're a funnel expert. Can you help me out? I've got this business. I'm doing this, and this." So okay, cool. Let's chat. So we got on a call, and as we were talking, he did this thing where he would just go quiet for a little while, and it's super awkward. We have kind of like a natural tendency to try and fill the awkward silences, right? And so, so basically, don't talk too much. If you said your piece, don't keep rambling. I ended up giving him a bunch of advice, and he never ended up using my services. So he got free advice, and I left with nothing, and he wasted, I think, about almost 2 hours of my time. So, say your piece, stop, let them talk, and see where they're at. And then finally, when you're done, work the numbers. So when you're also looking at your clients, you've got to think about a few things. Avoid bargain hunters. They pay very little and typically expect the world. In the retail world or even in e-commerce, cheap customers are never good customers. When I was working in retail, we always had the most amount of returns on customers that were buying cheap stuff. People who bought expensive products, typically, they thought differently about their money and their time, and they actually valued their time, so they would not go and refund something unless they absolutely had to. Whereas people that are typically low budget, they want to spend very little, they have absolutely no problem spending hours chasing and asking for refunds and doing that sort of thing. So when you're dealing with a bargain hunter, when you're dealing with clients, it's the same thing. They're the kind of client that is going to ask you to do stuff and not want to pay for it, or be on the phone all the time, or try and get a hold of you all the time, or constantly send you messages. So there are a lot of high maintenance and very little payout. Avoid time wasters. So sometimes you're going to get people that you'll talk to, and you think it's a good sell and you've done a good job, and then you follow up, and then you follow up again, and then you follow up again and again and again, and they never end up coming back. So there's a trick here that I use is I only follow up twice max, and then I'll leave it. So after the initial call, if it was early in the week, I'll do another follow-up by the end of the week. If it's midweek, I'll do a follow-up not on Monday, because usually Monday's a headache for most people when they first get back into the office, so try and do it Tuesday. But after the second follow-up, I'll let them know that, okay, I'll leave this with you now to make a decision, but this quote is only valid to this date. After that, the prices may go up, and then leave it at that. So that does two things. First, it tells them you're not going to chase them any further, and secondly, it also tells them there's a time limit on the quote. So they can't sit there and come back in 6 months' time and say, "Oh, I want that price." Spec. Does everyone know what spec work is? Okay, for anyone who doesn't know what spec work is, basically it's when people say to you, "Hey, can you do this thing for me? But I'm not going to pay you. It's going to be great for exposure." Okay, so don't ever work on spec. The only time you'll ever work on spec is if you are going to reach out to someone specifically. So you've got someone who's an authority in an area, and you know you can help them out, and you think it will give you great exposure, and that's your intention. Working on spec for that is fine. But do not ever accept people coming to you and saying, "Work for me for free." Okay? You don't. If they're promising you exposure, they probably can't give you the exposure that they're promising. Avoid clients that don't respect your time. So a good example of this is recently there's a client who they would always run late with things. They'd always forget something, or they do something last minute. So for example, you give them the quote, you have a discussion, they agree with everything on there, and then 3-4 days later, like, "You know what, I forgot something. Can you just like, it's not a big deal, just get that little thing, you know, that you did for me before and that you've already paid for, just tweak it," right? And or the other thing they did was they'll go, "Oh, I've got this deadline in 2 days. I need this thing like now, but you know, how much is that going to cost?" and then you give them the actual penalty rates for them. Oh, no, I can't afford that. Can you just do that thing and tweak it? You know, that last thing that we talked about. So what you need to do is just make sure that clients that do not respect your time, they're only not respecting your time because you're not respecting your time. So you need to make it very clear that you can't work on those terms. So have a pricing schedule for rush jobs, last minute stuff. Make sure that's very clear. And simply refuse to do the work. You don't have to accept the work if they're coming to you, okay? Because as soon as you say to them, yeah, sure, I'll do it, you've opened the floodgates, and they're going to keep expecting that, okay? And then that goes on to the next thing. Don't be combative, be professional. So you can say no to clients, but you sometimes they say something really, it bugs you, and you want to fire back at them. You just feel like, oh, they've annoyed me. I'm gonna give it to them. But it never helps. And you got to remember something. Anything you send in an email or a message, guess what? Someone can screenshot that. So if you want to look after your professional, like how you appear as a professional, you don't need to be combative. And if you've got clients that are that become abusive or problematic, sometimes the best way to deal with them is just not respond at all. Okay. So you got to think about what is the value you are providing to your clients. So I know we talked about doing all the costings and all the rates in the beginning, and that's just the basis. That's to make sure you don't lose money. But ultimately, you've got to think about what value you're providing. So if you can make a client $100,000, think about, in the grand scheme of things, how much that you should be getting paid for that value, okay? So it's not just about those base numbers. Those are really there to make sure you don't go under. But if you make more, that's perfectly okay. So worst case, frame it this way. If I can make you $1, would you give me 20 cents? Okay? And so I'll give you an example. This is one of my clients, and he purchased this spreadsheet that I use for doing all this calculation. He used this exact system. And so he says, thank you, Branko. Not only was I able to access the file, I've already sent my first quote using it and just got the text from the client that the check was in the mail. Before factoring in all costs involved, I was going to quote the client $650. But after factoring in all costs in the detail, the quote went up from $650 to $2,506. That's a 4x increase on what he was originally going to quote. That original quote, he literally picked out of the air. Okay? The client happily paid the quote and was actually impressed with the detail. Thank you again. This quoting should be a permanent part of my business. So the key takeaway here is if you use the system, it works and you will get paid. People will value your time and pay it. And the only other time I've come across, I had a client approach me one time and said, Branko, I'm struggling, I'm not making money anymore. I said, oh, what's going on? Can you explain it to me? He said, yeah, I've been quoting and I can't make the money like it was before. I said, well, are you using the system? Oh, no. It works if you use it. But you have to use it every time and without fail, because if you don't use the system, it's very easy to just go off track and just do what feels right. But that's not going to work out in the end. So to recap, develop systems, create templates, cheat sheets, spreadsheets, whatever you need. Use the 8 steps to get your numbers right, and make sure you use the system every time, because that'll give you the confidence to quote. And secondly, change your mindset. So think like a business owner, learn to respect your own time and expect no less from your clients, and be selective with when you work. And so that's that. There's me. If you want to reach out, that's my email address there, my website. Now, anyone who wants a copy of these slides, shoot me an email, and I will email them to you. And for anyone who is interested in looking at how to use this system, but in a more automated way, because I've already built templates and spreadsheets that people can use. You can find out more about it at brankomijatovic.com/nomad, which is a special offer for our space members. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
So, do you have any tips of things one can do to increase the kind of trust when you work for people who are in different countries? So obviously, you arrange Skype conversations, and because that's related to this, paying a deposit or whatever. When I think that some clients feel like if it's somebody in another country, they can run away with their money, and so
Sure.
Yeah.
So are you talking directly to the clients, or are you using like one of the platforms like Upwork or something like that?
well, in my case, it's usually people email me,
Okay.
and then I arrange a Skype,
Right.
which helps. But I always feel like because they always want to go for a coffee,
Sure.
and
Look, it's always going to be a bit of a challenge. Some people just prefer in-person meetings, but Skype calls are as close as you're going to get, especially if you're remote. But that's why I always recommend getting people on the phone, because there's one thing about just speaking to them and even seeing their face. But I've got clients just through a phone call. I didn't even see their face. I've never actually seen their face, aside from seeing their LinkedIn profile picture. So I think it's just a matter of just talk to them. You got to feel them out, see what, like, based on what they're saying to you. Just talk to them more and just assure them that you're a professional. You can provide them proof of what you've done in the past. You can give them some references if that makes them comfortable as well. So there's some things you can try, but there's always going to be an element. And I know definitely in some cultures it's very common for sitting over a coffee and having a chat. It still happens even back home in Australia. Clients want to meet me in person, and I'm like, well, I can't. So yeah.
Do you ever, if it's it's a bigger project with a big budget,
Sure.
do you ever fly somewhere to meet somebody if it's
If it's a big enough project, but the reality is I try and avoid it because I don't want them thinking that I can just jump on a plane and fly there whenever they need me. There's no real reason to ever fly over for a project anyway. Like what I'm doing, I write copy, so I don't need to actually see them in person. I look at their website, I look at their sales funnels, I see what they do, and I can do my own assessment and go from there. For me to spend money flying to see a client in person, it's not feasible. It makes no sense. So I would avoid working with clients that need that. Like again, it's perhaps a trust issue. Like you just don't need to work with them. There's plenty of people that do not ever need to sit in front of you and talk to you. So yeah, no worries. Any other questions?
Yes, that you spoke about payment front. It's also valid for Upwork, for example. Or?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll give you a little story where I didn't actually state to the client up front how I wanted to be paid, and I let him set the payment terms. And so what had happened was it was a job for 4 pages of content on his website, and we agreed on the price. He was very happy. He actually was paying more than what he initially said his budget was because he really liked my proposal. And I was pumped at the time. I was like, yeah, great. This client agreed to a higher budget than what he wanted. I'm doing good. So he went ahead and set the payment terms. But the payment terms were, he set 5 milestones. So 1 for each page of content, and the 5th one was for review at the end. So what happened was this client disappeared on a hiking trip for a part of the job. So I couldn't actually get him to tick a box that said paid. And so I actually ended up, this project that literally took me less than 2 days to do, it took almost 4 weeks to get paid for it. So yeah, you just got to make sure you make it clear from the beginning that you're expecting upfront payment. However, like I said, some clients will not accept that. They don't want to pay upfront. That's fine, but always take money ahead, and then you can get the difference later on delivery. That's very common as well.
From what I see, I'm not sure if I'm right, but Upwork gives certain safety nets regarding of the.
Yeah, it's escrow. That's right.
That has a good record, and he doesn't want to ruin that trend?
Sure. Yeah, I just, from my experience with Upwork, and I don't use Upwork anymore, so I'm off the platform completely. But the way the payments work, because of the escrow, that's why it took 4 weeks to get paid, was because he would tick a box and say yes, and then the payment would go through, and then it took 7 days to clear from Upwork, because it gave you that time to deal with any dispute or whatever. So, I'm not a fan of Upwork personally. So, I reach out to a lot of clients either directly through LinkedIn, or I actually approach them directly, going through websites and Googling. And
Why don't you like?
I don't like the fee structure. It's very expensive, and I think Upwork's a bit of a pissing match with people who pay very little or ask very little for money. So I know some people do really well on it. I just don't have the patience for it. For me to sit there and spend time putting together proposals and then have people undercut me, I don't have the time for it. So, and most of the clients that I want to work with aren't on Upwork anyway. So.
How do you build clients? What platforms do you use? You said you don't like PayPal.
I just give them a Stripe payment through. I've been using Wave Apps, which is it's a really horrible accounting platform. I'm actually looking at switching. I actually found one recently that was really cool. It's called Harpoon, and it looks like it's literally built for freelancers. It's got this cool dashboard. It takes Stripe payments through their system, so it's a Stripe affiliated platform. But it kind of gives you a way to track budgets. So, for example, if you want to set targets, so I want to make 100K for the year, it'll actually give you like a breakdown and a dashboard, so you can actually see am I on track to make my target. So I haven't switched to that yet. I'm in the process of investigating, see if it's worthwhile for me. But that's probably the platform I'm going to switch to. But before that, just been using Wave Apps. I send them an invoice directly from there. It uses Stripe, so I've got a Stripe account through there. And they can just pay directly from the invoice via email. So they can click on a link and it's a payment. Otherwise, they wire transfer, and I've got wire transfer details in the invoice. So that's what I do.
What was it called? Harpoon.
Harpoon, it's kind of HARPOON. Check it out. It looks really cool. So I stumbled on it. Sure.
What do you do if you have an ongoing client that suddenly says that they're waiting on invoices in order to pay you? Like they're waiting on to get paid in order to pay you. I feel like that's super fishy, and it makes me not want to work with them anymore.
Yeah. So these are clients that you've had?
Yeah.
And so what have they done? They've paid you, and then like 1 month they decide to pay late?
They paid me ongoing, and then actually this month suddenly they're saying that they were waiting on payments in order to pay me. But for me, it looks like broader implications of I just don't want to work with this client anymore.
Yep. If a client can't pay their bills on time, I'd be worried about working with them. I know it's common. A lot of bricks and mortar businesses will have this thing where they'll run for a month or so, and then they'll pay in arrears and do all this crazy weird accounting stuff. You don't need to deal with that. If a client can't pay you on time and you don't care, like you don't really want to work with them anymore, I wouldn't. If they can't pay their bills on time, to me, that's an indicator there's a risk. One of my friends recently had a problem where invoices weren't getting paid, so and then they ended up going broke. So you gotta think of that. I wouldn't.
I might have been that friend. So,
I didn't want anybody to
going on with your question, ongoing payments, At some point, especially if it's ongoing, in my case, I was working with them for 2 years. So you would say there's trust there, so there should be at least, right? So the way I was doing it is I was literally sending 2 invoices a month. One of the invoices would be just for the hours that I was doing, and I know that probably I should have never made an agreement that was based on hours. And then the second invoice would be the rest of the hours of the month plus the bonus because we have a rev share agreement. So the thing is, when one starts to be late, then the second, mean, since it's ongoing, and obviously there's also a rev share involved, if I stop working, then then the revenue is gonna go down,
Sure.
right? And I also, if this relationship continues, then I'm kind of biting my own butt.
Yeah, my honest opinion on that is that at the end of the day, if you don't fight for your money, no one is. So you can say that if I don't do my job, the revenue could potentially drop. Absolutely, but then that should make them even more incentivized to pay you.
Right.
So I would push back really hard to
Right.
make sure.
So would there be a term where you would say like, okay, I'm gonna stop working if it's this way, or I'm gonna stop working?
Me it's 30 days. If after 30 days they haven't paid me, like they've missed payment by that long, like just stop.
30 days. And what do you usually put on these as a payment term for these kind of
Just put in there. Actually, you know what? I'll send you the what I've got in the actual terms. I can't think of it off the top of my head. So it's a long document.
And another question is, so what should I have done instead? So first, now if I now do again an ongoing job, and I want to avoid this from happening, what would you advise me to do?
So again, it would depend. Are you treating yourself as an employee or as a contractor for them?
Well, it would be a contractor, but since I would probably do the majority of my day would be spent on clients.
Yeah.
Even though, I mean, a lot of, that's another whole other question.
Yeah.
But I prefer it since my focus is better. I just have less invoices and people to deal with, and even though it's a bigger risk that if I lose that one, I lose pretty much the majority of the income, right?
Yeah, I'd stick to the payment in advance if it's on a contractor basis. If you're an employee, you're never going to get paid in advance because that's not how employees
So
work.
like, if I would again go for a rev share and like a fixed package, for example, like per month I charge this, and then I want to move away from the depending on hours and stuff. Would you say 1 month ahead? Like how would you do this?
Yeah, so your rev share, I haven't done a rev share, so
Sure.
I can give you an
That
example.
would have to go
But
afterwards.
that would have to go afterwards, I would assume, based on calculations. They have to work out how much they've done for the month and all the rest, so that'll always be paid back.
Right.
But yeah, there's no reason they couldn't pay you for the work in advance for the retainer. essentially.
Retainer, but actually the bonus could also come out of the retainer, I guess, right?
Sure.
Although that might be very unattractive for a client that doesn't know you.
Potentially, yeah. Bonus would usually come out at the end as well, because it's obviously based on some sort of performance measurement,
Right.
so some sort of KPI. So,
Sure.
so I would assume that will come at the end as well, along with your rev shares. So,
Got it.
One thing that will help me set up with and I actually approach you to do the extras is set up a monthly retainer. And then if there's anything extra, like if they have a rush deadline or they need something extra, then you can just say like, okay, it's going to be this much additional. I can tell you that at the end of the month. Like that way, it keeps payments really, really basic for the client, so they don't feel like they're just shelling out money to you all the time. Is they just have the same retainer bill the same day every single month as a base cost, and then any extras you can pile at the end of the month in that invoice. And then it's like only 2 payments maximum from the month, but you're guaranteed.
But even with the retainer, right? Imagine they don't pay it. It's like I'm gonna start working for them on 1st of October. They send the invoice. It's happening. It's not paid yet.
So
that
that's
already
the thing.
started.
It's like invoices should be on a automatic subscription, or I'm sorry, retainer should be on
yeah,
automatic.
I was just going to say that, if you can set up an automatic payment system, it removes the need for you to make that uncomfortable phone call and talk to them.
Right.
So if you're going to go on a
That's
retainer.
what you've done
Yes.
or with this other
Yeah.
agency.
Yeah, you can set it up and go in. This is a recurring invoice, and it's a recurring payment. You can make it a subscription style one, or you can make one where it just sends them an invoice, and they just get automatically notified. So depending on how you want to do it, but if you know you're going to be working over a set period and have monthly payments, I'll just make the subscription payment because it just saves the headache. No, good.
Do you have any tips when it comes to working for friends, like something like here?
Don't. no, finish your question. 'Cause
No, I
there's
mean,
more to it.
I wonder if there's any way to do it and, you know, still maintain the friendship
Sure.
and make money.
Look, the reality is, you know your friends pretty well. Some people can have really good working relationships with friends, and some people can't. It's like when you move in with a mate from school and they're your best friend, and then you realise you can't live together, you know, and you hate each other afterwards. So until you're actually, I suppose, in bed together in that sense, you're not going to know. But you should know your friends well enough to know what kind of person they are, whether they're going to pay in time. At the end of the day, it's still business. So you need to demand payment, and you can't let, I suppose, the emotional side get in the way of that. So if you're not comfortable doing that, don't work with a friend. It's just that simple. If it's going to be a point of friction for you, and you're like really struggling to be able to go to your friend and say, hey, you owe me money, I need you to pay the bill. If that at the core makes you uncomfortable, then just don't work with friends and family if that's a problem. But you need to be able to do that if that's what you want to do.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, one thing that I got as a tip from my old manager when I became a manager was that I kind of asked him, how should you have like a friendly relationship with your employees? Is that okay? Be like buddies? And they said, well, if you're able to have a friendly relationship and you're also able to sit down and have a really uncomfortable situation with them and tell them that they're not doing their work well, sure, do it. But if you can't make a distinction between those two, then don't.
Yeah.
But I think it probably applies very well to freelancing as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just kind of curious whether people have any system that, you know, friends will get a discount, but it's always the same one, or something that will make them happy, but...
Sure, that would look, at the end of the day, that's up to you. If you
Yeah.
decide, I mean, you can give discounts to anyone, right? So if you want to give mates rates or whatever, go for it. But just as long as they pay and you're still making money. The point is that when you give a discount to a friend, you don't want to lose money on the job. You don't want to work for free. Like, otherwise you're not running a business. You know, you're just helping them out with their business goals and you're not getting anything out of it. So, and if that's what you want to do, that's fine. But then you need to be fully aware that that's what you're doing. So, yeah.
Not to dig too deep, but just was curious, as a Australian living in Lisbon who charges American dollars, if that's due to how you incorporated yourself or something different.
No, actually, it's mainly based on the fact that pretty much every tool I use in my arsenal, I have to pay, all my costs are in US dollars, aside from my living costs here, obviously in Portugal. So, look, the worst case scenario would be if the US dollar was to drop considerably against the euro, for example, I'd probably have to switch to charging in euros. That's a lot of what depends on which currency I charge for me. Yeah, it's not to do with incorporation. I can take US dollars. I actually like getting the US dollars because then like my Aussie dollars are way higher, and so I make a bit extra money in currency.
That's been slowly getting worse.
Yeah. You buy it when it's terrible, right? You know, as for incorporation, that's a whole other kettle of fish, and yeah, we can chat about that later. So.
Regarding the issue time versus value to the client, how do you charge per value? How do you do a budget, detailed budget charging per value? How do you?
So it depends
how
on
do you
what
manage this thing?
It depends on what you're doing. So, for example, if you're, for me, and I'm talking mainly from a marketing background, if I'm working on, say, for example, a funnel, and I know there's X amount of customers, and I am expecting to make a certain amount of conversion rate increase, then I do calculations based on the potential value that could add, and then that's where I come up with the figures on that, if it's a value add. There's a reason why people who can, like, particularly that's why salespeople get paid a lot of money, is because they can add a lot of value to a business. So when it comes to value, for example, your costs, say you're a web developer, I don't know what you're doing exactly, but let's say you're a web developer and you're building a website, your base cost, you might have outsourced all the work, it might cost you $500 to make the site. It doesn't mean you have to charge $800.
The better you work, the less time you spend. So
Yeah.
you charge less, the better you work.
Well, this is the thing, like it's the opposite. So if you're more efficient with your time, you're essentially earning more per hour, right? And so you need to look at what are you exactly producing for them and what's the value.
And the clients accept that the budget you do per value is within this.
Well, so when you're budgeting, you're doing your quote. What you're doing is you're selling them on the service you're providing. You're not telling them exactly how many. Like you're not telling them like, oh, this is going to be 30 hours at $10 an hour. You're not telling them that. You never do that because that's none of their business. Your base costs and how it actually was calculated, that's not important. What's important is the service you're providing to them. So if you're providing with a proposal and you're giving them very detailed, like, okay, we're going to be doing this, and then we're going to be doing some SEO, and then and you're breaking that all down, and then you say that's $5,000, then it's worth $5,000. And if they pay it, it's worth $5,000. Okay, and that's where you're removing some of the emotion out of it. It's not about what you think it should be paid. It's more about the market. So you also need to understand your market and your industry and what some of the typical costs are, and look at that as well. So
Okay, we have time for one last question, and then we can do some informal questions.
I already asked one to somebody else.
Informal questions over here. Go ahead, Dan.
To follow up on his question, so we've talked about like the baseline for pricing, so we can look at costs and think about 20% or more to put on top and overhead and all of that. But if we are thinking about value and you can prove that you made them an additional $20,000, is there like a percentage at which, like if you're trying to come to some like you've got the base, like what's the ceiling, I suppose? Like,
so it really depends on. I'd say there's no real ceiling. It just depends on what kind of what project you're working on, because you can have projects that are worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, and so again, if you stick to your minimum 20% as your base that you're going to make as a profit margin. So if for example, they're building a site that's worth $100,000 and you want to make $20K on that, like as your margin, then that's
think about
fine.
it in a sales context, though, like
Sure.
what you're doing will lead to an additional $20,000 for them.
Yes.
So can you ask for 20% of that?
You could. There are options for that. I know that with copywriting, you can get it's like a commission sort of arrangement. I haven't personally worked on that level, but you can do where you get like payment up front for the work, and then based on how much sales that brings in, you get a percentage. And so I know in the copywriting world, it's anywhere between 5 and 10% they can get on that. Sometimes it goes as low as 2%. It just depends. But that's industry specific. So it would really depend on what you're doing and what industry. Or is it common to do a percentage and get some sort of revenue share or whatever it is out of it? But I know marketing typically or any kind of sales, it's very common to get some sort of percentage out of it. So.
Okay, thank you very much,